At the Phoenix Herpetological Society, located in Scottsdale, Arizona, you'll find a variety of creatures ranging from turtles and lizards to crocodiles and snakes. They house some of the planet's most exotic animals. However, one of their most notable attractions is their large abundance of alligators. And even though you'll find a rare albino alligator within their fences, some would argue that there is an even more interesting alligator living at the Herpetological Society. Meet Mr. Stubbs. With just a glance, it's easy to tell what separates Mr. Stubbs from the other alligators.
Well, Mr. Stubbs came to us in 2005. They stopped a truck down in Casa Grande and had 32 alligators on it. And he was just a little bitty guy then with no tail, and x-rays showed that the tail had been bitten off. And so when he went into the pen with the other alligators, we found out we couldn't put him in deep water because he couldn't swim without turning himself upside down and didn't know how to right himself. So we hand-fed him, and Dan and I spent 6 months teaching him how to swim, which is kind of funny to talk about an alligator, but he had to learn to dog paddle because he didn't have a tail to propel himself through the water.
Mark Jakowski, the Vice President of Research and Development at the Core Institute, was on a tour at the Herpetological Society when the idea to build an artificial tail presented itself.
When the idea was first proposed, I was able to pretty quickly put together the series of events that needed to occur to create the tail, and I thought that it would be fairly easy to do that and be successful. Myself and Sarah, our research associate, spent a lot of time researching the materials online.
Oh, like this.
We use a material called body double for anything that contacts the skin and for taking the initial molding, and we use a material called dragon skin for actually creating the tail.
So initially it started off with trying to figure out a way to make a tail that was going to be the right size for Mr. Stubbs, as well as something that would be relatively lifelike. And so for that we teamed up with Dr. Georgi of Midwestern.
Justin Georgi from Midwestern University proved to be an integral player in the creation of the prosthetic tail.
I'm an assistant professor in the anatomy department at Midwestern University's Arizona College of Osteopathic Medicine. I first heard about Mr. Stubbs' project at the tail when an announcement was made at the 2012 Phoenix Herpetological Society fundraiser.
He was able to provide us with a cadaver that was similar in size to Mr. Stubbs, mainly in length.
I have several alligator specimens, alligator cadavers here in my lab in the freezer that came from Louisiana with the population called down there. And so from one of those specimens that we determined to be about the right skeletal size to match Mr. Stubbs, we used the tail attached to that particular specimen as the model for the prosthetic tail.
I'm Kevin Manfredi. I am Dr. Georgi's research assistant. We took the tail carcass and we weighed it. And after we had the weight, we put it into a bucket of water. Then the water was displaced out of the bucket when we put the tail in there. And we were able to measure the amount of water that came out, and that's the exact same volume as the tail that we put in. And then having the weight and the volume, we were able to calculate the density.
So the next step in the process was to get a high-resolution mold of that cadaver tail, and then also a mold of Mr. Stubbs' rear that was exactly fit to that. Then to create a casting of the full cadaver tail, and then we also made a casting sort of the outside of Mr. Stubbs' back end, and then married the two of those.
It was a slow process. It was a developmental process, and Sarah, his main assistant there, spent probably 50% of her time basically constructing this tail, and Justin actually came up with the buoyancy measures because he has the ability to check motion and make sure we have center of gravities right.
The collection of the data on the physical properties of the tail was a little more complicated in terms of, first of all, I had the specimens, which was nice, but then we had to figure out what the best way and the least destructive way to measure the specimens was. But in the end, that all wound up working out quite well and giving us very good answers that the Core Institute was able to utilize quite effectively and accurately.
It was an effort over approximately 3 months between making the molds of the stump and the cadaver tail and bringing them all together, test fitting it, and refining it. You know, the devil's always in the details and the little challenges that come up as you go through the process.
One of the biggest challenges the team faced with the prosthetic tail was finding a strapping system that would stay secure on Mr. Stubbs, both in and out of the water.
Well, the original straps were just loops at the end of the tail that kind of fit over his legs, and those didn't work at all. They just came right off, and the tail slipped off when he walked. We had to tighten those with some gauze to make the tail stay on it all. Since then, we've added some straps that can be tightened and clipped into place in a different variety of configurations. When he got put in the deep water, he kind of sank because he wasn't used to the tail. He's still getting used to it. He's getting used to filling his lungs with air to change the buoyancy, but they're training him to be able to work on that.
After overcoming the initial obstacles, it became quickly evident that the tail was indeed working. There was a noticeable improvement in the way Mr. Stubbs both walked and swam within just a few days of putting the tail on.
With Core Institute's help, we're able to do this. You know, we're willing to teach him to swim. Core's done all the hard work. Justin Georgie's done the locomotion tests.
Dr. Georgi's locomotion tests of Mr. Stubbs were done on site and collected valuable information on how he moved before and after having a tail.
My motion capture studies involve a series of infrared video cameras arranged around a particular area, and the subject then wears, or in this case has put on, several reflective markers that then show up in high contrast in the infrared videos. The computer then takes all of those infrared videos, extracts the marker locations for each camera, and uses that data to synthesize a three-dimensional representation of where each of those markers are. So when we place the markers on Mr. Stubbs' head, Mr. Stubbs' back, and Mr. Stubbs' legs, the computer can then reconstruct for us a three-dimensional picture of how each of those pieces is moving as he walks.
Mr. Stubbs is fairly young in alligator years. He still has a lot of growing to do and will need additional, larger tails as years go by.
We had a couple of people, they're doubting Thomas's. They said, well, you're constantly going to have to refit a tail, you know, every couple of years. And Mark knows that. And he says, yeah, we're willing to do that. They're doing this out of the goodness of their heart.
I think it'll have at least a year's lifespan, if not two. The issue will be more that Mr. Stubbs will grow and change shape.
An alligator of his age is still growing fairly rapidly, probably less than the 12 inches a year of the youngest alligators, but certainly several inches to almost 12 inches a year for the next few years. At that point, his growth will slow down. So despite the fact that he will probably live, if he is treated well and remains healthy, for another 40 to 60 years in captivity, his need for new tails will decrease as time goes, and at some point we won't need to put any more on. But for now, I would anticipate we need a new tail every 2.5 years, depending on his rate of growth. Beyond that, I would anticipate that the tail will only need to be replaced every 3 to 5 years.
It wasn't long before Mr. Stubbs became known throughout the world, as reporters from all corners came to get the story of the tail.
Meet Mr. Stubbs, everybody, and two members of his team, Dan Marchand from the Phoenix Herpetological Society and Dr. Mark Joukowsky from the Core Institute.
I was a little bit surprised, yes. We help 200,000 humans a year here at Core, and it seems to be the animal that gets all the attention, right?
I was really surprised at how much the media loved the story. I knew people would be interested, but I didn't really expect this much.
I thought there would be a lot of coverage, but I would say that it's gotten a little bit bigger than I thought it would be, and it'll be interesting to see where it goes.
Some may question what the justifications are for the time and resources Mr. Stubbs has received. The specialists who worked on the tail, however, believe the scientific and moral benefits are obvious.
Every animal deserves a shot at a good quality of life, and Mr. Stubbs' quality of life was significantly decreased because of his disability. But more than that, you know, as a scientist, there's an interest in learning from this. I have a firm belief that you can't always tell what the knowledge you gain is going to be used for, and there's no telling what this particular knowledge could lead to in the long term.
When you do a process that hasn't been done before, you always learn something that you can then apply in another area. So while you might argue that there's not a tremendous amount of value in making a one-off prosthetic tail for one alligator, actually the information we gain from that process and the way it changes his gait and the way we've refined the prosthetic will teach us a lot in the long run.
But there's also a need to help where we can, and just because there are other animals or even people who need help, I'm not qualified to help those. I am qualified to help this particular alligator, and I think the fact that I've done so reflects well on me.
You might ask why not for any veterinary medicine. It's worth helping an animal if you can, even if it's an alligator. No difference from a different animal.
You know, if it was Bambi, everybody and their brother be out here panting, oh, let's save this furry little guy. Why doesn't those feelings actually get to be conveyed upon a reptile? It's still a creature. Our specialty is reptiles. You know, mammals are a food item here. So, you know, he's entitled to any benefit that any mammal, dog, cat, whatever, any other pet would be. You know, all it's going to be is our time. So why not is my question.
I mean, it's a great story. It's a feel-good story, and there's a lot to be gained on both sides of it. Whether you're the alligator or you're the researchers that are figuring out how to make this tail, we learned a lot in the process of just making this tail and things that could potentially even be applied to humans, just in the learning process of figuring this out. So I think it's been a great project all around, and you know, if you have the means to help something out, whether it's a dolphin or an alligator or a human, you know, why not?
It's really great. I feel really lucky and honored to have been a part of this project.
It's been a fun project. I'm glad I was involved.